I've been following Grant Cardone for a while now. And despite the hate that he gets, I absolutely love his tenacity, his grit, and his mindset to keep pushing for greater goals, greater dreams to achieve his life's purpose. Even at 65 years old, Grant Cardone is still showing up on every single podcast, every single show. And on top of that, he even has a TV show called Undercover Billionaire, where in 90 days he has to parachute into a city with no money, no network, and no name recognition of who he is, and build a multi-million dollar business all over again to prove that the American dream is real. And in preparation for this talk, I thought to myself, what about being the undercover billionaire of podcasting? I've been interviewed over 400 to 500 times in my career. But now looking back, if I had to start all over again and I had zero network, zero name recognition, and zero interviews, what would I do tomorrow to become a world-class podcast guest all over again in half the time? This is exactly what I would do, and this is my version of undercover billionaire for podcast guesting. Let's begin. Number one, I would listen to interviews of people in the same industry. In my case, it's communication. And I would write down every single question that that host is asking that guest and then pretend I'm the guest. Here's a problem with all of us as podcast users. We listen to shows in a passive way while we're cooking, while we're running, while we're going on a marathon, while we're driving. And there's nothing wrong with that. But because we're listening to it passively, our identity is not caught up. We don't sit back and go, huh. Well, if Lewis Howes was interviewing me, if Joe Rogan was interviewing me, how would I answer those questions? Because I want to be a health expert. I want to be a communication expert. I want to be that person on that stage. And that's the extra step that I would encourage you to take. So let's say we take my expertise, which is communication. So when I was younger, I would sit down, I'd listen to all of these communication experts and then think to myself, well, if I was them, how would I answer their question better? Questions like, how would you overcome your fear of communication? How would you teach somebody else to do it? What is three tips that you would share for introverts? And every single day, what I would do is I would sit there with a blank piece of paper and I would say, what is my version to this answer? What is my version to this? And I would make that answer better every single day, week, month. And this is great because you don't need to be interviewed on a show to do this. You can do this right away. And that's what I encourage you to do. Book some time in your calendar right now. I'm not talking about next week. I'm not talking about next month. I'm talking about right now. Book that 60 minutes and listen to a podcast of someone that you want to be. I want to be like Mel Robbins someday. I want to teach exactly what Tony Robbins is teaching, or a health expert you admire, whatever that person is. Take the time to listen to them, write down every question the host is asking them, and ask yourself, how could I answer this question better? Or rather, what is my version to this question? Number two, what is the second thing I would do to become an undercover billionaire in podcast guesting? The second piece that I would approach this conversation with is I would ask one of my best friends to interview me on a Zoom call. Why is this important? Your first interview is always the hardest and the one that you're the most afraid of. And here's a quick story by Seth Godin. He calls this pick me culture. As human beings, we're always waiting to get picked. In high school, it's to get into college. In college, it's to find somebody that we love and we get picked by them to be in a relationship with them. Whether it's to be an actor in a movie, to get a big job after we graduate, we're always waiting for the world to pick us. And Godin argues that it's that very nature as human beings that makes us miss our human's potential. That makes us wait for somebody else to say, you know what, I choose you. And you know what my philosophy is? I don't care if anyone picks me, as long as I pick me. And as James Altucher says, as long as we choose ourselves, and we see value in the work that we do, eventually other people will recognize it. Because what's a podcast at the end of the day, team? It's you and somebody else getting on a Zoom call and answering questions. So I don't want you to wait for permission. I want you to change your mindset. You already are that expert. You don't need to wait for somebody to pick you. So just ask your friend to jump on a Zoom call and start asking you the questions you've been practicing. So that way it gives you a safe, comfortable opportunity for you to practice questions. You can clip those podcasts on social media. No one will care whether that person is a podcast host or not. And on top of that, you'll have broken the ice. Your identity will start to change. And I wish I did that when I was younger in my podcasting journey. I started guesting on podcasts in 2019, and I waited for somebody to pick me. And it was my friend. But it now, in retrospect, I wish I hadn't waited for that opportunity. I wish I had just started practicing. And that's my message to all of you. You don't need to wait to get picked. You can start right now and be interviewed tomorrow. You don't even have to worry about the guest pitch because at the end of the day, if you're good enough, you're so good on a podcast, the market can no longer ignore you. That's really the point. So let's recap this so far. Number one, listen to a podcast every week of someone who's already in your field, who's already walking the talk and playing the game that you want to play, and write out every single question that person is asking that guest. And just sat down with a blank piece of paper and ask yourself, how would you answer these questions better? That's part one. Part two is wait for your friend. Ask them to just interview you. You don't need to be on a podcast to be a podcast guest. Because a podcast guest is exactly what I'm doing right now. You just got a Zoom call, you talk. And a lot of us are scared. We say, oh, you know what? This doesn't count. Oh, I'm not ready to be on a show. Well, if you wait your whole life to be picked, you might spend the rest of your life waiting. And that's not what I want for you. Number three, my final piece of advice in my trifecta is as soon as you're done preparing, as soon as you're being interviewed, you're comfortable now. This is my secret weapon and how I got booked on so many podcasts. I think I've been booked on almost 500 podcasts so far in my career. And it's very simple. The secret is in the podcast pitch, include a YouTube video of you sharing your three best tips that you would have shared on the podcast regardless. Let me explain. A lot of you are thinking right now, well, Brenden, I don't have a YouTube channel like yours. That's not what I'm communicating. What I want you to do is get on a Zoom call like the Zoom call I'm on right now and literally record yourself for 5 minutes, writing out and communicating your three best tips. If you're a health coach, share the best three tips that nobody else is sharing in the industry. If you're a communication guy, share the best three communication tips. If you're a fitness person, share the best three fitness things. Business tips doesn't matter as long as it's your best stuff. Why is that? Very simple. Most podcast hosts, when they receive a pitch, most of us make the mistake of sending a podcast we were interviewed on previously. This isn't wrong, but the problem is that the host is receiving so many applications, especially if it's a big show. So you want to make sure that you're giving them something easy to click. That's why I love a private or a public video on a YouTube channel, even if you don't have a YouTube channel, because they see the YouTube link and they're more than happy to just click that really quick. They'll watch the video and go, damn. This is really good. I need to have Brenden on the show to share these tips to my audience. That's exactly how I got booked over and over and over again. I kept my pitch sweet and short, and I just said, hey, this is a free video. I don't even care if you have me on the show. This is important information. I think you should just learn this. And I'll admit, it was a little easier for me because I teach communication skills. So a lot of the podcast hosts wanted to have me across any industry because they just loved the tips I was sharing in that video. But the principle remains the same. If the podcast host is receiving a pitch, they'll probably not listen to a past episode you're on. It's too much energy, but they will listen to a 5 minute YouTube video. I can guarantee you that. I've sent hundreds, no, at this point, thousands of cold emails, and that is the main reason people are booking me on the show. Now it's a lot easier these days, but if I was getting started, that's exactly what I would do because exactly would have worked for me. So let's recap. Number one, write out the questions that people are being asked in your field right now on shows. Write them out and find better answers to those questions. Number two, ask your friend tomorrow. Don't wait to be interviewed on a show. If you're starting from zero, ask your friend and get interviewed tomorrow on a Zoom call. I don't even care if you record it or not. It's just great practice for you, like going to the gym. And number three, when you're comfortable in your podcast guesting pitch, whether you're doing a pod match, whether you're sending out cold emails, whether you're sending out LinkedIn DMs, include that 5 minute video. Hey, whether or not you have me on the show, not, it's totally fine. I just attached a quick video on 3 easy tips that I feel would benefit your audience. And if you do that, my friends, I promise you, not only will you land your first podcast interview at lightning speed, but you will be an icon in your industry in the shortest amount of time because you did the work, you became an expert, and you might not be Grant Cardone tomorrow, but you're definitely going to be one step closer to being a world-class podcast guest. Thank you so much.